Welcome to Your Lettings Journey, a brand new podcast that's essential listening for landlords with property in North London. Now, everyone will have their own unique landlord journey, from the way they get into property to the way they hang up or pass on their keys, and then all the different decisions in between. But along the way, we're all faced by many of the same issues and potential pitfalls. I'm Rachel.
And I'm Ramesh, and together we have a lifetime of experience as landlords, letting agents and tenants that we want to share with you to help you navigate your lettings journey.
So if you're an experienced landlord wanting to make sure that you're keeping on the right side of all the rules and regulations, or if you're completely new to this game and don't know where to start, then this is the podcast for you.
Your Lettings Journey is produced by Belvoir Enfield and Central Housing Group. For more information, visit belvoir.co.uk/Enfield and centralhousinggroup.com. Hello. In this week's episode, we're going to be discussing EICRs. So yes, it's all about electrical safety. How do I ensure I find a competent, approved electrician? And what if my tenant refuses to give access to the electrician? These are some of the questions we're going to answer this week.
We're talking about EICRs, electrical installation condition reports, and I know that they are important, but when we looked at talking about this, I thought, do we need to do this? Because I'd say around 90% of the landlords that I speak to either know what an EICR is or at least know that they need to have one. And the only people that I meet who don't know what an EICR is have either just bought a property or they've been self-managing for a long time and the change in legislation has just passed them by. So why are we talking about it?
I think we're talking about it because it's an important bit of health and safety that's brought in. And it came in during the pandemic. And I've come across landlords in a similar way to you that have been letting a property for a long time, and they have missed that bit of legislation. I think it was a busy time for everybody. So I sometimes come across landlords and they're like, oh, what do I need? What safety reports? So I think it's important to get a refresher and just to understand how it sort of works now and what's involved, really. So, yeah, I still think it's relevant.
Okay, I'm not going to disagree that it's relevant because, for a long time people were thinking, well, why are we checking gas and we're not checking electrics? So do you know the reason behind why this was introduced? Because people ask me a lot and I think, I don't really know, but it's about time it caught up because we had gas for a long time and we should have had electric. So What actually happened to make it happen?
I'd say there was a couple of things I would say. One was there was a realisation that there was this anomaly between gas and gas was mandatory and electrical installation testing wasn't. And in 2004, there was quite a serious incident with an MP's daughter who died in a property. This was her own property where she had some electrical work done. She drilled in a wall and ended up tragically passing away. So there was a big campaign to improve electrical safety in residential homes. And obviously there was Part P brought in, which is a bit of legislation. And then there was more focus on safety in the home.
Okay, sorry, you just dropped that one in there. So Part P was brought in so what's Part P? What happened there?
Part P is basically legislation that was brought in to say that if somebody's doing electrical work in a property, in a residential property, they must be approved under Part P regulations, electrical regulations, to do an installation of something new. Not changing just a light fitting or a socket, but if you install anything different and new in a property, that was the Part P regulations that are brought in. But that didn't apply to residential let properties. That only applied to your domestic homeowner type properties. That was, when you do an install. But the other thing I was going to say is I suspect that the impact of Grenfell would have sort of raised the awareness of health and safety and the lack of regulation on electrics in the rented sector, basically. That was I guess the driving forces behind those.
Okay, so I'm a landlord. I've got a new property. That new property doesn't have an EICR because, it's not a new property. It's a new property to me. That property doesn't have an EICR because you don't need one to sell a property. So what do I do? how do I find an electrician, and how do I go about getting this EICR?
Well, I guess most people would go onto Google and search for an electrician, but I would actually say you might be better off looking at one of the electrical bodies. There's a few of them. There's ECA, NAPIT, ELECSA, NIC, EIC. But there's also a couple of government websites where you can search for an electrician. I think what we can do is put those details in the show notes. One is called the registered competent electrical person type scheme. But if we share those details, that would be helpful. And you can search according to a postcode. And then you need to sort of select if it's a landlord type inspection property. And then it will give you a list of potential electricians you could approach directly who are approved to do safety testing for residential let properties. So was that your question, Rachel? Sorry.
Yeah, no, it was. It's just sort of what are my next steps in terms of, if I know I haven't got an EICR, but I'm going to need one to get it let out. So yes, I would say absolutely. You're quite right. The first thing to do is to find a competent registered electrician. And I think most people tend to go onto Facebook. From the things I've seen around Enfield, you see lots of people, I need to have this certificate to rent my property out. And I probably personally wouldn't do Facebook. Agreed. I would, as you say, I'm useless at remembering all these website names, but what I would remember is going onto the government website and saying, how do I find an electrician? How do I get X, Y, Z?
I had an interesting experience actually with a landlord in Harrow who was taking on getting a property ready. And this lady went on to Google, found an electrician. He had 60 plus reviews, all very positive. Contacted him, said, I need an electrical report for letting my property. He said, yeah, no problem. Came round, did the report. And Bob's your uncle. He did some electrical work as well. And then she passed it to me and I had a look at it and I checked and I realised that there wasn't a serial number on the report and there was no sort of official kind of logo of which body this chap was a member of, which obviously gave me alarm bells. So I promptly did checks on that registered competent electrical site and realised that he wasn't a member of any particular body. Lovely chap, very nice, very helpful, and she couldn't speak highly enough of him. But we had to go back to him and say, look, you're not a member of a body. And he said, oh, I've never been a member of a body. I've always done reports and never had a problem. We're like, well, we have a problem because the legislation says you must do an EICR and you must be somebody who is registered and approved. So we were quite lucky in that instance that she didn't have to go and find a new electrician. He had a friend who was an electrician who came out and did the test and sort of gave her a certificate. But just shows you, just going on Google doesn't always work. Even though somebody could have great reviews, you do need to check out their credentials.
Yes, I like the bit where you say, lovely chap, very helpful, but behaving in a completely dreadful... I'm trying to find the right word that I can use on the podcast. But no, completely not helpful and lovely, I would say, because he must have known that he needed to be certified. He must have known that he needed to have a certificate number. And if he doesn't know those things, genuinely doesn't know those things, then would I trust him as an electrician? No, absolutely not. Yeah. So lovely and helpful. Not buying that one completely. Dodgy as hell.
It could have been really bad.
It could have been really bad because it could well have been that the work that he did wasn't actually up to scratch and there could have been a fire accordingly.
And he could have run off into the night, which he didn't.
And he could have run off into the night. No, that doesn't make him a nice person. He's still quite possibly going out and doing things that he shouldn't be doing. So no, sorry, I don't care if he's nice and friendly and smiley.
Maybe I'm being too nice. Man.
It's like a mechanic working on your car and then you find out that actually they're not a certified or whatever mechanic to be able to do stuff. It's like, oh, well, you might have been nice and friendly and you might have got someone to do the work afterwards free of charge, but hey, I could have crashed flying around the M25. No, not buying that one, sorry. So yeah, stay away from Google, stay away from Facebook. I think go to a registered site, and if you don't remember the names of the registered sites, then go to the government site or potentially ask your local letting agent or estate agent, because they should be able to recommend people who can do that work to a required level.
Yeah.
But I had much the same, actually. And normal people do make those mistakes. I had a landlady who was applying for her own, applying for selective license herself. And obviously the council will check those certificates as part of the licensing process. And the council then went back to her and said that this person isn't certified. This person can't produce you or cannot give you an EICR. You need to get somebody else to do it. And she she didn't know. And I could sit here and tell you he was a lovely chap and he covered the cost of getting it done again, but I won't do that because I don't think he's a lovely chap. So yes, so go to a certified place or go to somewhere where you can find out if someone is genuinely certified. But even that, I don't think is enough, because I've had encounters with electricians where, yes, they've been certified. Yes, they're probably very good electricians, but where they've tried to include works that are not required. Have you encountered this at all?
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny one, because there's this set of electrical regulations, and you get different electricians will interpret them in different ways sometimes. A bit like MOT stations, where you take your car in and one garage will test X items and really focus on those, but miss other things. And you'll take it to another station. They won't look at those things, but they'll focus on others. That's what I found in the past. There's not always consistency, but sometimes you do get electricians who may look to add additional things that aren't required. But I guess you've got to try and get recommendation really to somebody tried and trusted, ideally.
Yeah, it's difficult though if you don't know what is expected. So the examples that I had were quite easy and quite obvious, because I'm not an electrician by any stretch of the imagination. Although at the time that they brought in EICRs, I thought, maybe I should retrain as an electrician, because they were all very, very busy. But no, these were simple things. I used to be a member of a networking group that we were both part of, and sitting down with electricians, a couple of electricians at this time, who were trying to convince me that you needed to have mains wired smoke alarms for a certificate. And it's like, no, you don't. No, you do, Rachel. No, you really don't. It's best practice, but you don't actually have to have them. And at a time when my landlords are possibly spending a lot of money having their fuse boxes and everything replaced, do I want to tell them that they have to put in mains wired smoke alarms? As an option, possibly, but as a you have to do this, no. And I encountered in total 3 electricians who said this. And I just thought, no, that is extra work that is just not required. And I was in much the same situation. So one of these was for a property that was a long way from base. So I couldn't use my regular electrician for this. And we got someone to go and do the test, and it failed. And then he came back and he said, you need to do these. And it's like, no, I don't need to do these. And then he refused to do the work. He said, well, that's the way I operate. And if you don't want to put the alarms in, then I'm not going to do any of the work. It's like, okay, happy days. Thank you very much. So yes, it's a little bit difficult. Recommendations are good. Yes. Sorry. I'm going down a little rabbit warren there, and I will come back out again. Okay. So, when I, as a landlord, so I want to be a little bit involved in what comes back with my property. So, they give me this certificate, and they say, sorry, Mrs. Landlady, your certificate is unsuccessful. It's unsatisfactory, I think is the term. What sort of thing is going to be appearing on there, and how do I know the severity of the issues that I've got?
So they will note the kind of faults and the things that are missing, whether it's like electrical earthing or bonding, or there's a fault with a circuit, i.e. it's not got ring continuity or things like that. And what they would do is they would classify those, give you sort of 4 classifications. So one is C1, which is really basically dangerous. You need to do something immediately because there's risk of injury. C2 is potentially dangerous, so you still need to deal with that quite quickly. Something requires further investigation because they couldn't establish what was going on as part of that electrical test. And the last one is it's not to the current standards, sort of C3. So they recommend you could improve it, but it's okay. It's acceptable. And you usually get 28 days to resolve those issues, basically. That's what the law says now in terms of electrical regulations. So you get one of 4 codes.
Yeah, my understanding is that C1s, they have to take action immediately. C2, C3 and F1 can be looked at within 28 days. But C1 is kind of, it's like serious. The electrician, as I understand it, needs to leave it safe when they walk out, even if that means turning off all the electrics completely, disabling them or sticking great big yellow signs across it saying, don't use this, don't use that. Okay.
That's your red flag.
Yeah, exactly. And I think with one of the questions that I was asked recently was, if my certificate comes back as unsatisfactory, can I still have somebody living in this property? Can I still let this property out? What's your stand on that?
Yes. If it's a C1, no, you need to take action, shut it down and get that resolved immediately. If it's the other code, C2, then you really need to tackle that within 28 days or further investigation, I would say. And if it's a C3 code, you're not obliged to action and deal with that. That can be left because it's considered still satisfactory, but could be improved if you want to. An example of that would be often landlords have a plastic fuse box which is got RCD compliant. So that usually is a C3 code because the fuse box is made out of plastic and it's not considered as good a fire retardant material. While the thing to resolve that would be to install a metal fuse box, and that's a C3 code. So that could be perfectly acceptable to be left.
Yeah, I think C3s on their own you will get a satisfactory pass. I think people do get a bit concerned sometimes where they have that combination of C2s and C3s, and that's again where I would talk to the electrician and just be completely clear on which when they give me a quote, what are they actually fixing, and actually, am I happy leaving the C3s? Am I happy leaving them there, or do I want to do them now in one go rather than coming back in 5 years' time and having them appear again and having to actually do them? So I'd say, talk to your electrician and get an idea around that. And one of the things I always look out for, it's a bit like getting an MOT, in my opinion. If you get quotes for an EICR, if you're calling around and seeing how much people charge for the basic EICR, quite often if you get someone who's doing a very cheap EICR, there will be extra works that you end up paying for in the end. So it's much like a cheap MOT. You'll quite often find that you're stung afterwards with all this stuff that actually you didn't really need that. Didn't really need that doing at all.
Yeah,
I'm possibly just being a bit suspicious here, but
it's possible. But also, another interesting point I've experienced over the years, you can get some electricians who will produce an EICR which is only for 1 year. So there isn't a set period that you must produce an EICR for in terms of an electrician. There's not a set. The maximum is 5, but some do 1 or 2 or 3. I've seen over the years, and sometimes when I've sort of spoken to those electricians, you've got a plausible answer where they say, well, I wasn't happy with the installation because there was a series of junction boxes which were run and I wanted those to be checked after 2 years. So they've got a valid reason for not giving a 5-year certificate. But on other occasions, you think, well, this is a sort of a new build flat, which is only 15, 20 years old. Why does it need to be tested so quickly? And that makes you wonder whether the electrician is looking for a way to revisit that property again in the future and do a retest. But so
I haven't seen that many that are not 5 years. I'm struggling to think if I have seen any, but I know my understanding is that it's based on whether they think something is not quite up to scratch and therefore needs to be tested again at a certain interval.
Yeah.
I have also seen some where it says to be checked at 5 years or at change of tenant, and if you ever see that, question it, because this is a time-based thing. It's not event triggered. So I would question your electrician about that, because I don't believe that at change of tenant is a valid point at which to test your electrics. So that's just a little note.
Sure.
And although I'm feeling like I've been a bit harsh on electricians, because the majority of electricians I've met have been absolutely fabulous people who do a job that I don't understand at all. I have, however, encountered one real baddie, which is why your helpful and friendly person with his managed to find somebody else to do it for us didn't kind of wash with me, and that was where we inherited some properties, or we were given some properties, and we received EICRs for them, and we sent an electrician out to do some work at a property, and he said, "You need an EICR for this property." And I said, "Well, we have an EICR," and he was just like, "No, I don't believe you do. I don't believe you do, Rachel." And it turned out that all the work that had been specified on the unsatisfactory report and removed from the satisfactory report, so therefore having been done, had in fact not been done. And yes, this person wasn't supposed to be issuing EICRs, wasn't registered in his own right, and did not work for the company that he was professing to work for. So yeah, you just need to be careful, as with all things.
Absolutely.
I've gone down my rabbit warren again, haven't I, Romesh? I'm sorry. I promise I will come out of it now. So, okay. Well, worst case scenario, if I don't have an EICR now, what should I do? If I'm renting my property out, I don't have an EICR, what do I do?
Get one straight away. Call an electrician and book one in, because you stand to be potentially prosecuted. I think it would be the local authority trading standards, and you could be fined up to £30,000. That's not their first course of action. They just want the electrical report and the situation remedied because their concern is health and safety. But that's your worst case scenario if you just continually ignore requests and fail to meet your obligations.
Yeah, I think there's So like I said, with the lady where they found that her EICR wasn't created by the qualified electrician, they just said something first, and so she had time to get it done. I think it is if you have the repeated requests and don't do anything and that kind of thing, where they actually say, right, that's enough, £30,000, thank you. I don't think that happens. Don't think that happens easily. No. What do I do if my tenant will not let me in to do an EICR?
Really good question, actually. You need to make a concerted effort to get access and put that in the form of an email, letters, and record your communication to show that you've made numerous attempts to do that, and to document the fact that they're refusing access or preventing. Because if somebody were to look at it further down the line and say the local authority, they complain to the local authority, I don't have an electrical report, you'd be able to demonstrate you'd made efforts to do that. So the government's advice on this is that, yes, provided you can evidence that you have tried, then you're not going to be sort of wrapped over the knuckles in a situation where somebody's preventing you gaining access.
Absolutely. I think it's like everything, isn't it? Just keep it in writing. You've got to be able to evidence it, that you have been making attempts. So EICRs, for example, part of the deregulation pack that you have to serve at the beginning of a tenancy, and you're supposed to give certificates, obviously, as you go through the tenancy as well. But what happens if I want to, while we still can, serve Section 21 notice on a tenant and I haven't got my EICR?
Good question, Rachel. I don't serve Section 21s in what we do.
I was going to say, it's not particularly fair to ask that question.
My understanding, I should be asking you this question. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I would have thought you do need to have the EICR because you've got to have all of those certificates in place to demonstrate that you've met the legislation and the requirements. Would that be right?
Yeah, you do need to have an EICR and to have served it, but obviously if you can't get into the property, then you would just use that as, you demonstrate that evidence at the same time. I think the only thing is it might make life a little bit more complicated, in that it might actually mean you have to go to court and actually have that hearing to be able to show that evidence. But right. It's not something I've encountered before, but it's just something to potentially be aware of. You can, of course, still serve Section 8, so you can still evict someone for rent arrears and what have you if you haven't done an EICR or haven't got an EICR. Yeah, they may well put a counterclaim in against you for being a bad landlord, but
I was going to ask you, Rachel, about tenants' appliances. So what's your understanding on appliances? Well, firstly, electrical appliances in the property that belongs to the landlord, and then tenants' appliances.
Yeah, so appliances aren't covered by EICRs. Did we actually talk about what was covered in EICRs? We did, didn't we? Okay, so appliances aren't covered. I don't know if we did, actually. We've been talking, for so long. So EICRs are electrical installation
condition report.
Oh, my condition report, yes. And so
Yes.
it tests basically the infrastructure.
Yeah.
So it tests the integrity of your electrical system across the whole property. So it covers the fuse box and all the circuits and connections to the fuse box, but then it also covers sockets and switches, basically. And not all of them, obviously, an electrician will test a percentage of them, but it basically tests the integrity or degradation of your system, which is why if it's good, it's 5 years. If there are potential, slight issues, then it's maybe a 2-year certificate. And if there's stuff that's just, yes, your wires are all corroded, then it's in no years, you've got to get it done and then redo it. Doesn't do any testing of appliances. So as a landlord, you can then get supplementary PAT testing, so portable appliance testing for any electrical goods that you might have in there. And people often think that portable appliances are just things like toasters and kettles, but actually it's basically anything, like even a fridge freezer is portable, depending on who you are. But yeah, so it doesn't cover that, and you can get PAT testing. I think PAT testing tends to be annual. You should on an HMO, definitely you should be having PAT testing carried out. But on selective or individual family properties, it's also best practice to have PAT testing. And it does not cover at all tenant appliances at all. Tenants are responsible for their own appliances, and I'm not testing them at all.
No, absolutely.
Is that right?
No, you're spot
Okay.
on.
Yeah,
Spot
and
on.
it's an interesting one, because most of the time when we have an issue, when we get a call from a tenant saying, all my electrics have gone, all my sockets downstairs have gone, nothing's coming on at all, then we have to get them to step back through what it is that they were doing. Okay, so what's the last thing what were you doing at the point that all of the electrics went? What was it that you were doing? Were you cooking? Were you doing your hair? What were you doing? What was the last thing that you plugged in? And try and isolate it in that way. And then we just say to them, okay, turn everything off. Go around and it's generally involving the kitchen or the ground floor, but go through all of your appliances, turn absolutely everything off, down to the cooker hood, down to the fridge freezer, all of those, turn everything off, and then flick the switch on your fuse board back up to the on position, or is it down to the on position, whichever it is, but to the on position, and then go around and turn each appliance on. And at the point that it trips again, that's your dodgy appliance. Because invariably, now that we have EICRs, it is a dodgy appliance as opposed to anything else. And so we then say, don't use that appliance. And yeah, I find quite often it is things like curling tongs, or we had a baby bottle sanitizing thing, did it as well. And it has been an oven hood on one occasion too. So, yes.
Yes, spot on, I think. Right.
I feel that was a very comprehensive answer. I'm quite proud of myself.
You should be, Rachel. You should.
Thank you very much. I've been called at 10 o'clock at night far too often with all my electrics have gone out. Can you send somebody around? No, I can't. Yeah. Please do this.
The only thing I would add, Rachel, is that the benefit of having these modern fuse boxes now, RCD tripping, it basically reduces the likelihood of potential fires starting, which is obviously the whole purpose of part of these electrical regulations, to save lives and to prevent injuries and accidents. So we often find, because it trips it out, you don't have that situation where you're going to have an appliance causing a fire potentially, or so yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it is well worth having, and I would kind of agree with people who said, well, why didn't we have this before? Why did it take until 2020 or 2021?
2020 and 2021, yeah, combination.
Yeah, it was July 2020 for existing tenancies and April 21 for new tenancies, wasn't it? So, yes, why did it take until that long when we had gas certificates for so long? Why did it take so long to get there? I would kind of.
No, I think it was the other way around, Rachel. It was July 20 for new, and
is that not what I said?
No, I think you said it the other way around.
Yeah, July. Oh, I said it the other way around. Yeah, July 20 for new. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Yes, July 20 for new tenancies, April 21 for existing ones. Yes. Sorry.
Yeah. That's all right. Okay. Was there anything else we need to cover on EICRs?
I hope Darren can edit out my dodgy coughing. The only thing I was going to say is I don't believe it applies to all types of tenancy. So there may be people watching who perhaps don't need one. So if you're doing a standard residential let, then yes, you do need one.
Yeah.
But my understanding is that you do not need an EICR if you are a living landlord, which I thought you did, but apparently not. If you have social housing, again, I don't understand why that's not required. If you have a hostel, care home, halls of residence, or if you have a long lease, which I believe is a greater than 7 years lease, apparently in those situations you do not need them.
Yeah.
I find that surprising. I find that very surprising. Excuse me, I do find that very surprising. So halls of residence where you're surrounded by students, I'm thinking, why do you not have one?
I think they may be covered under some kind of more commercial type regulations.
That's true. Maybe there is some other, and there probably is for social housing as well.
I would have thought there'll be a requirement to test them for safety because they wouldn't want to exclude them from it, I would have thought. But I just think it's not part of this.
Yeah, there's probably something other than EICR that they need to have.
Yeah.
Degree.
One thing we haven't talked about very quickly is how much does an EICR cost? What does it cost typically?
I think it depends. I mean, the ones that we do, we have a couple of electricians. So the ones that we do tend to be between 140 and 175 plus that for the basic test. So that doesn't cover any remedial works at all. But obviously it depends on the area of the UK that you're in. And it depends on the size of property, the number of rooms, the number of circuits. So I'd say around that kind of mark. I'd say if you're being charged over 200, then either you live in a castle or you've got a very expensive electrician.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think that's
tally with your
spot on.
findings?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's based on size of property and number of circuits generally. So yeah.
Mm. And I'd say if you're renewing your EICR in 2025, July 2025 or April 2026, probably more likely April 2026, I would get in early because there's going to be a sudden rush again.
Yeah, absolutely. I think though it'll be more doing an electrical retest as opposed to doing a test and lots of work, because obviously you've already carried out a fair bit of work to bring it up to a good standard. So, whilst electricians will be busy, it may not be. They may not
unless
be
they
so
change
snowed
the
under.
rules again. Unless they change the rules again.
Well, they do change electrical regulations on a regular.
No, exactly. And so the things that were allowed previously because they were valid at the time that your installation was put in, but are now not up to current standard. When you get another standard in, will those other things suddenly need to be addressed? Because presumably you can't just say this was okay in 1940, therefore it's still okay in 2025. Presumably at some point they do say, Rachel. Yes, it was valid at the time, but it needs to be redone.
Yeah, no, very good question. I mean, we've seen this because we've carried out EICR electrical installation certificates for the last 20 odd years, and we've seen from the 15th edition regulations, and they keep changing. And so, yes, over time they do change their mind and say, right, you now need to deal with this. So something that could be left as a C3 now, in 5 years' time, could well be a requirement to carry out. So yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So another possible reason, if you are doing one now and it's got a C3, just get it done, because at a later date it might well need doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
So that was our trip into EICRs.
It was indeed. I think we've pretty much covered it all. But if anybody has questions or wants to ask anything, obviously, by all means, email us or contact the local electrician. Was there anything else?
No, I just think it's one of those things not to be afraid of. But again, I would say if you are listening to this and you are, this is like EICR. What is an EICR? How has that happened? How did I not know about this? Then I'd say that you need to do one of two things. You either need to get yourself up to speed. Yeah. Get yourself up to speed and, join a landlord association. So, I'm going to go completely blank here on who are my landlord associations. Sorry.
NRLA.
Ramesh? NRLA.
NRLA.
That's it. I was going to get my acronyms all completely wrong. So join the National Residential Landlord Association, or somewhere like that, where you can get up-to-date information and you're kind of spoon-fed with updates as to what you need to do as a landlord, or think about using an agent, at least to get your property let out, if not managed. Somebody likened this whole situation to if you had a car and you didn't have an MOT. It doesn't matter how good a driver you are. It doesn't matter how clean your car is. You should not be driving it. And I would say much the same kind of applies to properties. To be a good landlord, you need to be aware of what you need to do for a property. So, yes. So this shouldn't be hitting you as a bit of a surprise. And if it does, take action.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Well said.
Thank you very much. I'll get off my soapbox now.
Okay.
And on that happy note, thank you very much. I think, unless there's anything else, I think we have done EICRs.
Nope. We've done it. Thank you very much, Rachel. And see you all next time.
If you enjoyed this episode, then we'd love your support. Please subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode of the podcast with your friends.
We'd also love to hear from you about any topics you'd particularly like us to discuss. Please send an email to yourlettingsjourney@gmail.com.
Thanks for listening, and see you for the next episode of Your Lettings Journey. Goodbye.
Goodbye.